Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another video. Today we've got a really good video regarding line care, and more specifically, 5 ways you might be damaging your line and you're not even knowing it. There's nothing worse than going out fishing, getting a big fish to bite, and then having your line break. And a lot of times your line breaks because of something that you did that could have been prevented. Yes, there's definitely times when you're fighting a fish and they get you around, a dock post that's full of barnacles, or they get you, down in a rock pile or a brush pile and you get stuck. But there's also a lot of times where you end up breaking a fish off when nothing, really changed during the course of that battle. You didn't apply too much pressure, the line just breaks. And generally when the line breaks, it's because there was some sort of fray in the line. There was a weak spot, and a lot of times those weak spots are something that we either did as an angler or could have at least identified. And I'm going to give you 5 ways you might be damaging your line and you're not even aware of it. These are really important to you as an angler because the last thing you want to do is lose the big fish of the day. Before I do share these with you, though, I want to remind you I do have a members only channel. So if you're looking for more content from me, we do monthly live streams, additional videos. You can have direct access to me. You can go to my homepage, click on the join button, find out more that you need to find out to join the members only section. We also are always happy to have your support. If you're looking to purchase tackle and want to support the channel, please use my Tackle Warehouse affiliate link. I'll put that in the video description for you as well. And I'm hopeful it's tips like this that keep you coming back to the channel. All right, so let's talk about these 5 ways that you may be damaging your line and you're not even aware of it. So the first one, a lot of today's baits are loaded with salt. Salt in fishing line, specifically monofilament and fluorocarbon, do not go hand in hand. There's a reason why saltwater anglers will often rinse off all of their gear, whether it's their boats, whether it's their fishing rods, their fishing reels. They'll take fresh water and rinse their entire boat and all their tackle down. And it's because that salt is very corrosive and can do some damage. Well, a lot of our bass fishing lures are loaded with salt. So if you happen to be taking a fishing lure, hooking it on the reel, and that's kind of how you store it. So that lure may actually be hanging down onto your spool of line. And if that lure has a bunch of salt, some of that salt's going to get on your fishing line. Same thing can be said for, if you're just handling a bunch of baits that have a lot of salt in them, and you go, you put a new bait on, you put that reel down, or your hand puts some salt on that spool of line, and you put it down. If that salt sits there for a while, it can actually damage your line. It's one of those things that happens more frequently than you think. And if you happen to pull line out and you have, say, a little bit of a nick or a little bit of a corrosion type looking spot on your line, and it's like every 27 inches, based on where it was in the spool, a lot of times that's because you had some salt sitting on that one spot in the spool. And when you pull the line out, you have like 5 sections in a row, roughly 27 inches apart, where you have like a little bit of corrosion. A lot of times that's based on salt, and you'd be surprised how much salt is in some of these fishing baits these days. So definitely want to keep your really salty plastics away from your fishing reel spools. That's a definite no-no. And it even can be to the point where if you're storing a rod and reel for a long period of time and you leave your baits on, that salt can, if that bait is rubbing against your line while it's in storage, it can lead to issues from that standpoint too. So be aware of the salt content in your baits. Make sure your fishing line is not in direct contact with that salt for any extended period of time. So that's the first thing. Another thing that a lot of anglers don't realize is how not good it is for your fishing line if you're using, say, a Texas rig and you have a pegged weight and you're fishing a different rod. You go to pick up that Texas rig, and maybe your weight is a few inches from where your bait is. So you grab that weight and you slide it down to the top of the bait. Well, if you're doing that without moistening your line, you could be leading the damage. The same thing can be said for tying knots. If you're tying knots and you're not wetting that knot, you're tying that knot on dry line and pulling it tight, you can actually lead to like a burn on that line. It can happen from a pegged weight as well. If you're sliding that pegged weight down on completely dry line, especially when it's hot and dry out, and that pegged weight maybe isn't real soft, you can burn that line and it can lead to a weak spot. So anytime you're tying knots or you're sliding a pegged weight down your line, try to make sure that it's a moistened fishing line when you're doing that. You will not damage the line if you're doing it in that form. If it's completely dry, it could be damaged. The next thing to realize, and this goes back to fishing Texas rigs, do not be slamming that weight down on top of your knot. So if you're sliding a pegged weight down, don't shove it down on top of the knot. You can weaken that knot. That can lead to damage, especially with tungsten. Tungsten is such a hard material that even with the best tungsten weights out there, that force coming down on that knot can really damage it. Even if you're using an unpegged weight, a free-flowing weight, with a free rig or a Texas rig, that constant sliding down on your knot can weaken the knot. So just be aware of that. You might want to retie your knot a little bit more frequently anytime you've got something that's free-flowing or at least being pushed down on top of the knot on a regular basis. I also want to mention anytime you're fishing on a really hot day. So I think probably a lot of you have experienced this, especially if you like to fish barefoot like I do. If you're fishing on a really hot summer day, different parts of the boat can become extremely hot to the touch. One of my favorites or least favorites with respect to this are like compartment lid latches. That metal spot, man, you step on that, it feels like it burns you instantly. Well, you want to be aware of that with your fishing line as well. If you happen to have some rods sitting on the deck of your boat or somewhere in a boat, and your fishing line comes in contact with something that is extremely hot, it can weaken your line. So you want to be aware of where you're putting the line. In my case, on the deck of my Skeeter boat, I'm always making sure that the rods are laying on the carpet and not on some form of metal. There's potential where your compartment lid latches are. There's a little metal latch, I guess, where that can be something that could touch. You just want to be aware of it. I'll frequently actually take lake water and dump it on the deck of my boat just to cool the carpet down and to cool the different areas where my rod and reels are, because I truly believe that will damage your line. And the last thing is kind of the complete opposite of the really hot weather. If you happen to be fishing when it's below freezing, below 32 degrees, and you might be getting some ice in your guides, you really want to pay attention to how much your line is coming through those guides that have ice. Those ice crystals can be razor sharp at times. So if you are fishing in really cool temperatures, just be checking your line on a regular basis to make sure that you're not getting a nick, because at some point throughout the course of that period, it is very likely you'll get a hard spot of ice that has a jagged edge that will nick that line. For me, I'm very, very familiar fishing in wintertime temperatures, sub-freezing temperatures, getting ice in the rod guides all the time. You'd be amazed at how you can fish for hours. Everything is fine, and all of a sudden then you feel your line, you'll find a new nick, and it just happens to be because you had a different formation of ice that was able to nick your line. So those are 5 things that very frequently damage someone's fishing line, and they can be something that you can identify, you can prevent as an angler. I always say we have very, very few controllables in fishing, and this is a controllable, meaning you can pay a little bit closer attention to your line, recognize that you may be doing a few things that are damaging it. You get rid of these, you'll prevent a lot more break-offs over time. Hopefully this was helpful. If it was, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned, we'll have a new video coming out tomorrow.